Clara Evans tightened her grip on the worn leather strap of her handbag as the black iron gates swung open before her. The driveway stretched ahead like a scene from another world, flanked by manicured hedges and fountains that glittered under the Atlanta sun. Each step she took felt heavy with the weight of every choice that had led her here, every overdue bill, every sleepless night spent worrying about her daughter, every silent prayer whispered into her pillow. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She was here because she had no other choice. The Blackwell estate loomed ahead, a mansion of sharp angles and glass walls, reflecting the sky like a mirror that dared the world to look closer. Clara's heels clicked against the marble as she followed a uniformed assistant through the grand entryway. The silence inside was suffocating, a silence that spoke of money and power, but also of emptiness. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm. It was just a job. That was what she kept telling herself. A temporary position, housekeeping, maybe some help with the boy, enough to cover rent, enough to buy new shoes for her daughter, nothing more. She had read the articles about Damien Blackwell, billionaire, genius, ruthless, a man who built an empire from silicon and algorithms, who dismantled competitors with a smile, and who, according to gossip columns, went through staff faster than most people went through light bulbs. Clara had sworn she wouldn't let men like him intimidate her again, but as she stood in his foyer beneath chandeliers that sparkled like frozen rain, she felt her pulse hammering in her throat. "Mr. Blackwell will see you now," the assistant said, his voice clipped, efficient. The double doors opened to reveal a study lined with books and glass walls overlooking the city skyline. Damien Blackwell stood with his back to her, broad shoulders square, D in a tailored suit. He didn't turn immediately, and for a fleeting moment Clara wondered if he'd even acknowledge her. Then he faced her, and she understood why people called him unshakable. His expression was carved in stone, his eyes sharp as cold steel. "Miss Evans," he said, his tone a test, as though her name itself needed to prove its worth. "Yes, sir," she replied, forcing her voice steady. "Thank you for seeing me." His gaze swept over her, professional, detached, before he gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "I run my household the same way I run my company. Order, discipline, efficiency. I expect nothing less from the people I hire. If you are late, careless, or incapable of following instructions, you won't last a week." Clara's fingers clenched around her handbag strap. She wanted to tell him she'd survived things harsher than his rules, that she'd raised a child on her own with nothing but grit and sheer determination. But instead, she nodded. "I understand." The door creaked then, and a small figure peeked inside. A boy, no more than 6, with tousled dark hair and wide, wary eyes. Ethan Jr. His small hands twisted nervously at the hem of his shirt as he hesitated in the doorway. Clara's heart squeezed at the sight. He looked like a child who had forgotten how to laugh. "Not now," Damien said, his voice softening only slightly. But the boy's lower lip trembled, and before Clara realized what she was doing, she rose from her seat and crouched down. "Hey," she said gently, her voice instinctively taking on the soothing lilt she used with her own daughter. "It's okay. Did you need something?" Ethan Jr. looked at her, then at his father, uncertain. Clara extended her hand. "Come on, you can tell me." Slowly, hesitantly, the boy walked toward her, his steps unsteady like he was approaching a stranger's world. Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You're safe, sweetheart. Nothing to be afraid of." Something shifted in the room. She felt it before she saw it. Damien was watching them, his mask of stone cracked by the smallest fracture. His jaw tightened, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, held something raw and unguarded. Pain, grief, longing. Clara held the boy close for a moment, whispering softly until his trembling eased. She glanced up, and their gazes met. For the briefest heartbeat, the billionaire and the single mother stood on equal ground, bound by the fragile thread of a child's trust. And in that silence, Clara realized the truth. This job wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't just about cleaning rooms or preparing meals. There were shadows in this house, shadows wrapped around Damien Blackwell's soul. She thought she had only come here to earn a paycheck, But as she rose with Ethan Jr.'s small hand still tucked into hers, she sensed something else entirely. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, something that could either heal or destroy them both. Clara woke the next morning with a knot in her stomach and a restless energy she could not shake. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a museum of secrets. Every polished surface reflected her unease. Every hallway stretched endlessly with its silent shadows. She had been hired to bring order, to keep routines, to manage the tasks of daily living. Yet from the moment she had held Ethan Jr.'s trembling hand, she sensed her job was already so much more than that. The boy had been quiet at breakfast, picking at his toast while his father read the paper in silence. Clara tried to coax a smile from him, telling him about her daughter's silly habit of eating cereal with a fork. Ethan Jr. gave the smallest twitch of his lips, a hint of laughter that flickered like a candle about to go out. Clara caught it and nurtured it gently, leaning closer. "You think that's funny? Wait until I tell you about the time she tried to feed the goldfish with pancake syrup." This time his giggle escaped, soft but real, and it startled Damien enough that he lowered the paper. His gaze lingered not on his son, but on Clara, as though he was trying to understand what spell she had cast. Later, as Clara carried laundry down the hall, she noticed subtle signs of the life that had once filled these rooms. A cracked violin case abandoned in a corner. A stack of sheet music left untouched. The faint smell of lavender clinging to a guest room she had not been asked to clean. These details whispered of someone missing, someone whose absence still haunted the walls. When she paused too long, Damien's voice cut through the silence behind her. "Some doors are not to be opened." His tone was not angry, but it carried weight, an order she dared not disobey. Yet even as she nodded, curiosity burned inside her. That evening, when Ethan Jr. grew restless, Clara found him staring at the locked piano room. He touched the door handle as though drawn by a force he could not name. Clara knelt beside him, whispering, "What's in there?" His eyes grew wide, and he whispered back, "Mommy's songs." Before she could ask more, Damien appeared at the end of the corridor, his expression a storm barely contained. "Dinner is ready," he said sharply. The boy dropped his hand, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The meal that followed was quiet, too quiet, until the child spilled his glass of water. Clara reached for a towel at the same time Damien moved, their hands colliding. For an instant, their fingers brushed, and the air between them crackled with something neither of them acknowledged. Damien withdrew quickly, his composure snapping back into place, but Clara had seen the flicker of something unguarded in his eyes, a man used to control, struggling to hold on to it. When night fell, Clara tucked Ethan Jr. into bed. He clutched a small stuffed bear, worn at the edges. "Do you think Daddy still remembers how to laugh?" he asked in a whisper. Clara smoothed his hair, her heart aching. "I think he remembers. He just needs someone to remind him." She left his room with a heaviness pressing against her chest, only to find Damien waiting in the hallway. His face was unreadable, but his voice was low. "Whatever you are doing with him, keep doing it." The words carried an edge of command, yet behind them Clara heard something else. A plea. As he walked away into the shadows, Clara stood frozen, her pulse racing. She had come here believing this was just work. Yet every hour peeled back another layer of mystery, another glimpse of grief that ran deeper than she could comprehend. The house itself seemed to breathe with secrets, and Damien Blackwell was at the heart of them. Clara knew one thing as she turned back toward her small quarters. If she wasn't careful, this place would consume her. But even more dangerous was the realization blooming inside her. She wanted to understand the man who had built walls of steel around his heart. She wanted to know why his eyes looked like storm clouds every time his son laughed. And she feared that once she knew, she might never be able to walk away. The mansion seemed to shift at night, its wide hallways stretching longer, its glass walls reflecting shadows that didn't belong. Clara carried a basket of linens through the silence, her footsteps muffled against the marble. She was beginning to learn the rhythm of the house, the way the staff moved quickly when Damien was near, the way voices hushed when his name was mentioned. But there was still something that unsettled her, something beneath the polished surface that warned her to tread carefully. She paused outside a door she had not been assigned to close. "Ian." The brass handle was cool beneath her fingertips, the wood polished to perfection. But unlike the other rooms, this one carried a faint, lingering scent of lavender and sheet music. A memory lived here, heavy and unspoken. Clara hesitated, then shook her head. It wasn't her place. Still, as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the room was holding its breath, waiting for someone brave enough to open it. The next morning, Ethan Jr. lingered by the same door. His small fingers brushed against the frame, as if reaching for something just out of sight. Clara crouched beside him. "What's in there, sweetheart?" The boy's voice was a whisper, fragile as glass. "Mommy's music." Before she could ask more, footsteps echoed down the hall. Damien's voice cut sharp through the air. "Leave that door." His son flinched, stepping back quickly, and Clara felt the tension snap around them like a taut wire. Later that day, Clara found herself in the library searching for a book to read to Ethan Jr. The room was lined with shelves that stretched to the ceiling, ladders poised like silent guardians. As she scanned the spines, her gaze fell on a small wooden box tucked on the highest shelf, barely visible. It looked out of place among the books, its surface worn, a faint scratch across its lid. She felt a prickle at the back of her neck, the kind that told her she was being watched. When she turned, Damien was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the box before shifting to her. "That is not for you," he said, his voice low and cold. Clara straightened, clutching the book in her hands. "I wasn't touching it." His gaze lingered, as though measuring whether she was telling the truth. Finally, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "My wife's things are off limits." There was no anger in his tone this time, but there was steel, and beneath it something else. "Ball. That night, the storm returned, rain lashing against the glass walls. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Clara found Ethan Jr. trembling in his bed, clutching his stuffed bear. She sat beside him, holding his hand until his shaking slowed. "Tell me a story," he whispered. She told him about her daughter's adventures at school, about silly mistakes and brave moments, until his eyes finally closed. When she stood to leave, she found Damien leaning against the doorframe, silent. His expression was unreadable, but in his eyes there was a flicker of gratitude, quickly hidden as he turned away. Clara's heart beat faster. He was a man who had built walls so high no one dared climb them, yet she had seen a crack tonight, small but real. And she knew the box in the library, the locked room, the storm in his eyes were all pieces of a truth waiting to surface. As she closed the door softly behind her, a thought settled heavy in her chest. She was already too deep. Whatever secret haunted Damien Blackwell's mansion was not going to stay buried forever, and when it rose, she would be standing in the middle of it. The storm came fast, rolling over the Atlanta skyline with a violence that rattled the glass walls of the mansion. Clara had been in the kitchen finishing the evening meal when the first crack of thunder shook the house. She glanced toward the staircase, half expecting Ethan Jr. to come running down in fright. Instead, she found Damien standing at the far end of the kitchen, his tie loosened, rain glistening on his shoulders as if he had just returned from the storm itself. Dinner had been set for just the boy and his father, but the storm changed everything. The driver was stranded on the far side of town, the assistant gone early to avoid the weather, and the chef had taken leave hours before. That left Clara with a bubbling pot of stew, a basket of warm bread, and 2 pairs of eyes watching her expectantly. Ethan Jr. tugged at his father's sleeve, insisting that Clara join them. She tried to protest, insisting it wasn't her place, but Damien, his gaze locked on hers with unnerving intensity. "One meal," he said, as though daring her to refuse. They sat together at the long oak table, the storm howling beyond the glass, the chandelier flickering above them. At first, the silence was unbearable. Damien ate with precision, each movement measured. Clara kept her focus on her bowl, trying not to notice the way the boy leaned against her, finding comfort in her nearness. But then, as if by accident, a moment broke the tension. Ethan Jr. dropped a slice of bread into his stew with a splash that stained the tablecloth. Clara laughed, a soft sound she immediately regretted. Yet when she glanced up, Damien wasn't angry. His mouth twitched, almost against his will, and for a fleeting moment she saw him smile. The power went out suddenly, plunging the room into darkness. Ethan Jr. gasped, clutching Clara's arm. She hushed him gently, reaching for the candles on the sideboard. The flare of the match painted the room in warm light, and for the first time the house felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home. Damien's gaze followed her every movement, the shadows casting sharp lines across his face. When Ethan Jr. finally excused himself, too tired to fight the pull of sleep, Clara began to clear the table. Damien's voice stopped her. "Leave it. You've done enough." She froze, startled by the softness in his tone. He poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle opened earlier, sliding one toward her. "Sit," he said quietly. The storm outside grew wilder, the lightning flashing across the sky, but inside the candlelight wrapped them in fragile intimacy. Clara hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair. She felt his eyes on her, studying, measuring, as though she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He broke the silence first. "It has been years since this house sounded like laughter." His words were low, almost lost beneath the thunder. Clara's heart clenched at the confession, the pain beneath it unmistakable. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to vanish. She could feel the weight of his grief pressing against her own chest, the ache of a man who carried too much alone. She should have stood then, should have thanked him for dinner and excused herself back to the safety of her quarters. But instead she stayed, the storm outside drawing her deeper into the storm within him. Their fingers brushed when he reached for the bottle, and the touch sent a spark racing through her. He didn't pull back right away. His hand lingered, his voice barely above a whisper. "This house has been silent for too long. You are changing that." Clara's breath caught. The walls she had promised herself to keep between them wavered dangerously. She looked into his eyes and for the first time saw not just the cold billionaire, but a man haunted, desperate, fragile. And though she tried to tell herself it was only the storm, only the wine, she knew the truth. She was standing at the edge of something she could not control. The thunder roared again, shaking the windows, but neither of them moved. The storm was inside now, and both of them felt it. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the mansion. Clara could still feel the charge in the air days later, as if the walls themselves remembered the candlelit silence, the brush of fingers, the unspoken words. She tried to push it away, bury herself in the routines of work, but every glance from Damien carried that same storm beneath the surface. His son clung to her more than ever, and the house, once lifeless, now pulsed with small bursts of warmth that unsettled everyone who noticed. It was late afternoon when Clara found herself outside again, collecting the boys' toys scattered by the pool. The sky was clear, the city skyline glowing gold with sunset, but something didn't fit. A black car idled at the edge of the drive, its windows tinted too dark, its engine humming like a threat. Clara felt a prickle up her spine. The driver did not move, did not roll down the window, just sat there watching. She hurried Ethan Jr. inside, forcing a smile so he wouldn't see her unease. That night, she overheard Damien in his study, his voice low, sharp, edged with fury. "If the truth comes out, we lose everything." Whoever was on the other end of the line replied too quietly for her to hear, but Damien's next words froze her in place. "I won't let them use her against me." Clara pressed her back to the wall, her heart pounding. Who was he talking about? His son? Someone else? Or could he possibly mean her? The next morning, Damien appeared at breakfast, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed more like armor than clothing. He barely touched his coffee, his gaze distant. Then, with a suddenness that startled her, he turned to Clara. "You will accompany us to the gala this weekend." Clara blinked, confused. Me?" His eyes locked on hers, steel and fire at once. "You've already been seen at the school, at the park. People talk. It's better to show them what I want them to see." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The days leading to the gala passed in a blur of tension. Clara found a gown waiting in her room, emerald silk that shimmered under the light, clearly chosen by someone who knew her size better than she did. She wanted to refuse, to remind herself this was only a job, but something in Damien's voice when he had told her left no room for defiance. On the night of the gala, The mansion was alive with movement, staff rushing, cars arriving. Clara descended the grand staircase and saw Damien waiting at the bottom. For a moment she forgot to breathe. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, his mask slipping just enough for his eyes to soften. At the gala, the whispers began almost immediately. The billionaire and his housekeeper, the widow and the nanny. She heard fragments of gossip, sharp words disguised as polite conversation. But Damien never flinched. He kept her close, his hand warm against the small of her back, his every move calculated to show the world she belonged at his side. When the music swelled, he led her onto the dance floor. His hand claimed hers, his other at her waist, drawing her close enough that she could feel his breath against her ear. The chandeliers glittered above them, the crowd circled, but for a moment it was just the two of them. His voice was low, roughened by something deeper than desire. "Stay with me," he whispered, "just for tonight." The words pierced through every wall she had built. Suspense clung to them, heavy and undeniable, because Clara knew this was not just a dance, not just a night. It was a step into a dangerous world of secrets and shadows, a world that would not let her walk away untouched. The music faded into a softer melody as Damien guided Clara off the dance floor. Whispers followed them like smoke, curling through the grand ballroom of the hotel. She felt the eyes of Atlanta's most powerful people tracking her every step, their judgments sharp enough to cut. Damien's grip on her hand tightened, as though daring anyone to speak the words aloud. Clara lifted her chin, but inside her chest, her heart beat like a drum. She didn't belong here. Yet Damien looked at her as though she was the only one who did. They stopped near a tall window where rain streaked the glass in silver lines. Damien ordered champagne, his expression calm, almost too calm. He was a man playing a game only he understood. Clara tried to steady her breath, but the weight of the stairs pressed down harder than the glittering chandeliers above them. It was then a stranger approached. He was tall, impeccably dressed, his smile polished, but sharp as glass. Clara didn't know him, but Damien's posture stiffened, his jaw tightening. The man extended a hand to Damien, who accepted it reluctantly. Clara caught only fragments of their conversation. A new family arrangement. Risky for the company. People will wonder. Damien's voice cut through, firm and cold. Let them wonder. The man's gaze flicked to Clara then, and his smile turned poisonous. "Do you know what you've stepped into, Miss Evans?" he asked, his tone honeyed but laced with cruelty. She opened her mouth, but Damien was faster. "Enough." His voice was steel. "She is not your concern." The man left with a laugh that lingered long after he was gone. Clara touched Damien's arm, her fingers trembling. Who was that? Damien's eyes darkened. "A man who believes secrets are better currency than money. Stay close tonight." Later, as the evening drew on, Clara found herself alone near the terrace. The air outside was cool, the storm clouds breaking to reveal a sliver of moonlight. She leaned against the railing, trying to calm the storm inside her, but footsteps soon followed. Damien appeared, his tie undone, his expression shadowed. He stood beside her in silence for a long moment before speaking. "They will always talk. They will always look at me and see a man they cannot control. And now they will look at you and see weakness they can use." His words carried weight, like stones dropped in water. Clara turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that what you think of me? Weakness?" His eyes locked on hers, intense, unflinching. "No, I think you are the only thing keeping this house alive. The only one who makes my son smile. The only one who makes me remember what it feels like to breathe." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was just doing her job, but the truth tangled with her fear. His hand brushed hers against the railing, deliberate this time, lingering. "Stay with me," Damien whispered, his voice raw. "Not just tonight." Before Clara could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps shattered the moment. One of Damien's assistants rushed onto the terrace, pale-faced, clutching a phone. "Sir, it's urgent. They've leaked it." Damien's face turned to stone. What did they leak? The assistant swallowed hard. "The files. The accident. Your wife." The world tilted beneath Clara's feet. She saw Damien's hand clench into a fist, saw the storm rise again in his eyes, darker than the clouds overhead. He turned to her, his voice low and dangerous. "Go back inside. Stay with Ethan Jr. Do not leave his side." Clara wanted to ask what accident, what files, but the words died in her throat. The truth she had sensed lurking in the shadows was no longer just a whisper in the walls. It was here, breaking into the glittering night of the gala, ready to drag them all into its depths. The drive back from the gala was cloaked in silence, the city lights flashing across Damien's face like fleeting glimpses of a truth he refused to speak. Clara sat beside him, her hands clenched in her lap, questions clawing at her throat. She wanted to demand answers, to understand why a stranger's cruel words and a whispered phone call had left Damien looking like a man trapped between fire and ice. But his grip on the steering wheel was so tight his knuckles were white, and the tension rolling off him warned her to stay quiet. When they reached the mansion, Ethan Jr. was asleep in the back seat, unaware of the storm that had followed them home. Damien carried his son upstairs without a word, his movements careful, almost fragile, as he tucked the boy beneath his blankets. Clara lingered in the doorway, watching him. The man who had faced down billion-dollar rivals without blinking looked utterly undone by the simple task of saying goodnight. His hand lingered on the boy's shoulder before he pulled away, his face shadowed with something deeper than grief. Later, Clara found herself unable to sleep. The house was too quiet, the silence too heavy. She wandered the halls, her bare feet whispering against the polished floors, until she stopped outside the library. The wooden box she had noticed days ago still sat on the shelf, half hidden among the books. Something inside her insisted it held part of the truth. She reached for it, her hands trembling, and lowered it onto the table. The box was locked, but the keyhole looked worn, as though it had been opened many times before. She traced the edges with her fingertips, when suddenly a voice cut through the darkness. "That does not belong to you." Damien's voice, deep and quiet, came from the doorway. He stepped into the room, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried the storm she had seen at the gala. Clara straightened, her chest tight. "I wasn't going to open it." His gaze hardened, though his voice was softer. "But you wanted to." She swallowed, searching his face. "I don't understand. People were whispering tonight. They said something about your wife, about an accident." Damien's jaw clenched. Enough. But the silence that followed was more dangerous than anger. Clara saw the battle behind his eyes, the weight of secrets pressing down on him. At last, his control cracked just enough for the truth to slip out. "She's gone because of me." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Clara's breath caught. "What do you mean?" His voice was low, rough, almost broken. "The night she died, we argued. She left the house in the middle of the storm. The crash happened less than an hour later. She never came back." His eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "The world believes it was an accident, but I know better. She hated me in that moment. She died hating me." Clara's heart twisted. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but or she could speak. Damien's phone buzzed sharply on the table. He picked it up, his expression darkening as he read the message. His brother's name appeared on the screen. A single line glowed in the light. "The truth always finds its way out." Damien's hands trembled as he set the phone down. "Go back to your room, Clara," he said, his voice like steel cracking under heat. "This is no longer safe for you." But Clara didn't move. She looked at him, saw the man stripped bare beneath the armor, and realized something with a shock. The danger wasn't just outside these walls. It was inside his family, waiting like a knife in the dark. The following evening, the mansion carried a tension that made the air itself feel heavy. Clara tried to lose herself in the rhythm of chores, but her hands shook each time she folded linens or set a glass on the table. Damien had withdrawn completely, his footsteps echoing through the halls like a man pacing a prison of his own design. Ethan Jr. sensed it too, clinging to Clara's side more than usual, asking questions she had no answers for. "Why is Daddy angry again? Miss Clara, is it because of Mommy's songs? When the boy finally drifted to sleep, Clara found herself drawn once more to the library. The wooden box sat where it always had, mocking her restraint. This time she could not resist. She climbed the ladder, lifted it down, and set it gently on the table. Her pulse hammered as she searched the desk drawers, her hands brushing past papers and pens until they closed on a small brass key. She hesitated only a moment before sliding it into the lock. The box opened with a soft click. Inside lay a stack of letters, their paper yellowed, the ink faded. On top rested one envelope with Damien's name written in delicate script. Clara unfolded it, her breath catching as her eyes skimmed the words. It was unfinished, the last line broken mid-sentence. Damien, I cannot keep living like this. The threats, the lies. I feel like I am drowning, and I know you cannot protect me from what is coming. The rest of the page was blank, too. He pens ink, trailing off into nothing. Clara's throat tightened. This wasn't just grief. His wife hadn't been running from Damien, she had been running from something else, something darker. She replaced the letter quickly, but it was too late. The sound of footsteps froze her in place. Damien stood in the doorway, his face pale with fury, his eyes blazing. "What are you doing?" His voice was a low growl. Clara clutched the box, guilt surging hot through her veins. "I had to know. You've been hiding something that is tearing you apart. I can't just watch you destroy yourself and your son without understanding why." Damien strode forward, slamming the box shut with one hand, his other braced on the table beside her. "You don't understand anything." His face was so close she could see the storm raging in his eyes. "She died because of me, because I let them too close." Clara shook her head, desperate. No, she was afraid of someone else. She wrote about threats, Damien. She wasn't leaving you. She was terrified. For a heartbeat, his anger cracked, replaced by raw pain. Then the wall slammed back into place. "Get out!" His voice broke with more than fury. "Get out before I fire you and forget you ever existed." Clara's chest ached, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "If you really want me gone, say it to your son. Tell him why you can't sleep at night. Tell him why he asks me to remind him of his mother's songs, because you won't." Damien flinched as though struck, his mask slipping again. He turned away, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. For a moment, Clara thought he might finally tell her everything, but instead he whispered one sentence that chilled her blood. "If you stay near me, Clara, they will come for you too." The lights flickered then, plunging the room into darkness before the generator hummed to life. Clara stood frozen, the echo of his wabobias, boards clinging to her like chains. She understood now. This wasn't just a broken man grieving his wife. This was a man at war with shadows that threatened to swallow everyone he let close, and she was already standing in the center of his battlefield. Clara packed her bag in silence, her hands moving mechanically while her heart waged war inside her chest. She had told herself this was only a job from the beginning, that her purpose here was to earn enough to keep her daughter safe. But after last night in the library, after Damien's fury and the unfinished letter burning in her memory, she knew the truth. This house was no longer safe for her. The shadows surrounding Damien Blackwell were growing darker, and if she stayed, she would be pulled under with him. She zipped the bag shut just as the door creaked open. Ethan Jr. stood there in his pajamas, his stuffed bear dangling from one hand. His eyes were wide and frightened. "You're leaving, aren't you?" His small voice cut through her like a blade. Clara forced a smile she didn't feel. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. I have things I need to take care of." He shook his head fiercely. "That's not true. Daddy drives people away when he's sad. You can't go too." Clara knelt in front of him, cupping his face gently. "Your father has battles he needs to fight on his own." The boy's lip trembled. "But he won't fight them. He just hides. You're the only one who makes him smile. Please, Miss Clara, don't go." He leaned forward, wrapping his small arms around her neck. She hugged him tightly, her chest breaking. How could she walk away when this child looked at her like she was the only steady thing in his world? Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Damien appeared, his presence filling the doorway. His eyes went straight to the packed bag, then to his son clinging to Clara. For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen in the quiet room. Finally, Damien's voice broke the silence, low and hoarse. I told you it isn't safe. Clara rose slowly, her arms still around the boy. Safe from what, Damien? Who are you fighting in the dark? He didn't answer. His hand flexed at his side, his jaw locked, but the storm in his eyes betrayed him. Clara stepped closer, her voice trembling with desperation. I saw the letter. She wasn't running from you. She was running from someone else. Who is it, Damien? Who was threatening her? His son looked up at him then, eyes pleading. Daddy, please tell her. Damien closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the walls he had spent years building finally cracked. His voice was a whisper, but heavy with the weight of years. It was my brother. Clara froze. The words hung in the air like thunder. Your brother. She barely breathed the question. Damien nodded once, his shoulders heavy with shame. He wanted the company. He wanted leverage. He threatened her when she discovered the accounts he was hiding offshore. She was supposed to come to me, but instead she ran, and the storm took her before I could make it right. His voice broke on the last word, rough and raw, the confession tearing him apart. Clara felt her chest tighten. Everything she had suspected was true. His wife hadn't simply died in an accident. She had been crushed beneath the weight of betrayal, caught in a war between blood and power. Damien sank into the chair by the window, his hands covering his face. I've kept the truth buried to protect my son. If it comes out, it destroys everything I've built. And now they're watching again. They know you're here. Clara looked at Ethan Jr., clutching her hand, his small face pale but determined. He whispered softly as if reminding her of something bigger than either of them. You promised you'd always be here. Clara's throat closed around the memory. She had promised. Not just to him, but to herself. She couldn't walk away now, not when the child needed her, and not when Damien's confession had revealed how broken he truly was. She set the bag down, her voice steady, despite the fear clawing inside her. Then let me help you. Let me stand beside you. Damien lifted his head, his eyes searching hers, torn between hope and despair. If you stay, you risk everything. Clara met his gaze without wavering. If I leave, I lose everything. In the silence that followed, thunder rumbled again in the distance, as though the storm itself was waiting for what came next. The storm that had been building for weeks finally broke on the night Damien's brother decided to strike. Clara sensed it the moment she walked into the study and saw the message flashing on Damien's phone. A meeting had been arranged at the old Blackwell offices downtown, a place Damien had abandoned years ago when he built his empire into glass and steel towers. The message was simple: come alone, or everything goes public. Damien's face was carved in stone as he slipped the phone into his pocket. Clara stepped forward, her voice urgent. You can't go there alone. He shook his head. This is between me and him. I won't drag you or Ethan into it. Clara caught his arm, her fingers trembling. You already have. Every secret you've kept has been dragging us closer whether you wanted it or not. You don't have to fight this by yourself. For a moment his walls cracked. His eyes burned with something fierce and raw. Then he whispered, almost broken, if anything happened to you, I couldn't survive it. Clara held his gaze, steady and unflinching. Then you'll just have to make sure nothing happens to me. They left the mansion together, the night air thick with rain and dread. The old office building loomed like a skeleton against the skyline, its windows dark, its hallways echoing with emptiness. Damien pushed the door open, his hand steady, his shoulders squared. Clara followed, every nerve alive with fear. Inside, his brother waited. Alexander Blackwell was a mirror of Damien twisted darker, his smile sharp and cold. So this is the woman, he said, his eyes sliding to Clara, the one you led into your fortress. Damien stepped between them, his voice a growl. Leave her out of this, Alex. Ander laughed, the sound hollow in the empty room. Just like you tried to leave Sophia out of it. How did that work out? Clara's heart clenched at the cruelty, but Damien did not flinch. He moved closer to his brother, every word laced with fury. You used her to get to me. You pushed her until she broke, and you've been hiding behind silence while I carried the blame." Alexander's smile faltered, the truth exposed like a wound. He sneered, "The world will never believe you. I control the files, the accounts, everything." Clara stepped forward then, her voice clear and unwavering. "Not anymore." She held up a small flash drive, the one she had found hidden behind the false panel in Damien's study, while he prepared for this meeting. Every account, every transfer, every piece of evidence his wife had uncovered. Damien's eyes widened, shock and pride flickering together. Alexander's face twisted with rage. In the chaos that followed, Alexander lunged, but Damien was faster. Years of bottled fury exploded in that moment as the brothers clashed, their fight shaking the empty building. Clara shouted, her voice echoing against the walls, until at last Damien pinned his brother to the ground, his chest heaving. "This ends now." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Clara had already called them on the drive over, her instincts sharper than fear. When the officers stormed the building minutes later, Alexander was dragged away, his fury spilling out in curses and promises of revenge. Damien stood frozen in the aftermath, his body trembling with exhaustion, his eyes locked on Clara. Outside, the storm broke apart, the clouds scattering to reveal a sky littered with stars. Damien turned to her, his mask finally shattered, his voice low and raw. "You should leave me now. You've seen what I am." Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "What I see is a man who carried too much alone, a man who nearly lost himself to shadows but still fought to protect the people he loves." His breath caught, the vulnerability in his eyes piercing through her. Slowly, as if afraid the world might shatter, he leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Stay with me. Not because of duty, not because of fear. Stay because you want to." Clara's heart swelled, every wall she had built crumbling in that moment. She whispered back, steady and sure. "Always." When they returned to the mansion, Ethan Jr. ran to them, his small arms wrapping around both their legs. Damien bent down, pulling his son close, his voice breaking with emotion. "We're safe now, because of her." Clara felt the boy's hand slip into hers, and in that fragile, perfect moment, she knew the truth. What had begun as just a job had become everything she never dared to dream of. The mansion no longer felt like a prison of silence. It was alive again with laughter, with hope, with the promise of a future built not on secrets, but on love. And for the first time, Damien Blackwell stood unafraid of the world watching him, because beside him stood the woman who had given him back his life,